Before we wrap up Genesis 31, I want to put these genograms back up for a moment. If you remember, a genogram it's basically a glorified family tree, but instead of just showing who's related to whom, it shows what those relationships are actually like, where there's closeness, where there's conflict, where there's manipulation, favoritism, betrayal, cutoff, and even pain. So the lines don't just trace biology, they trace brokenness. So let me give you a fun example. Take the Skywalker family. You've got Anakin Skywalker with these red lightning bolts running between him and his kids, because when your parenting style includes attempted murder with a lightsaber, the relationship tends to get a little strained. But then you've got Luke with a tight, loyal bond to Leia and Han. Well, that's the difference a healthy relationship makes. Different lines, a different story. So now, look at Abraham's family. We've seen the fracture with Ishmael, cut off and just heartbreak. Isaac, he's the child of promise, but then Isaac's home turns into a mess of favoritism and deception. Rebekah manipulates, Jacob lies, Esau burns with resentment. The whole family system becomes a breeding ground for distrust. But now as we come into Genesis 31, I want to take us even further down the family tree into Jacob's household. 4 wives, 12 sons. And if you look at this chart, I mean, just look at the lightning bolts. It's not just messy, it's broken. And that's exactly why we've called this section of Genesis broken. And do you know why I love this chart? Because it puts words to something all of us already know, but don't always say out loud. Families are hard. And in this study, we're not just talking about your immediate family. We're talking about the extended web of relationships that comes with it. The people you can't avoid, the ones you dread seeing, the ones you feel obligated to keep the peace with, even when they've caused real damage. And if I'm being honest with you, I actually hate passages like this, not because they're boring or too long, but because they're too real. And they're too personal for me, because my family, my extended family, it's as broken as any other. And many of us know exactly what this feels like. Broken relationships, sharp words, old wounds, family tension that never goes away. And the worst part is, sometimes you feel trapped with the dad who never approves, trapped with the uncle who detonates every holiday gathering, trapped with the mother whose words still echo in your head years later. But here's what we're going to learn in Genesis 31. You don't have to win the argument to be free. So let's pick it back up in verse 17. Then Jacob put his children and his wives on camels, and he drove all of his livestock ahead of him, along with all the goods he had accumulated in Padan Aram, to go to his father's house in the land of Canaan. Did you notice what kind of animal Jacob put his wife and kids on? Camels. Camels, we've learned, were only for the wealthy. We've talked about how camels were like the ancient luxury vehicle in the Middle East. So Jacob is leaving Laban's home as a wealthy man. Well, where did all this wealth come from? Well, we read about this. Look back at chapter 30. In this way, the man grew exceedingly prosperous and came to own large flocks and female and male servants and camels and donkeys. Last week, we read the story of how God stepped in and kept his promise to Jacob. For 20 years, Uncle Laban had mistreated him, used him, and changed the rules whenever it benefited himself. But God said, I'm going to bless you. And he did. Jacob's wages would be the speckled, spotted, and streaked animals. And then something wild happened. Suddenly, all the lambs and goats being born in Laban's flocks were streaked and spotted, meaning they belonged to Jacob. Flock after flock. And the Lord prospered him. Jacob didn't just get by. He exploded in financial blessing. He grew wealthy. Servants, sheep, goats, donkeys, camels. The whole picture of a man who's gone from oppressed to established. And now we're going to come to something really interesting. It's what was Uncle Laban's good luck charm? It wasn't a charm at all. It was Jacob. Look back at Genesis 30, verse 27. But Laban said to him, to Jacob, "If I have found favor in your eyes, please stay. I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you." Did you catch that? Laban didn't seek the Lord, he sought divination. He was willing to consult demonic sources for insight. Yet even through his twisted methods, he came to the right conclusion. God is blessing my house because Jacob is here. So Laban saw Jacob as his secret to success. His source of blessing wasn't God. It was using a man God was with. And once he realized that, he would do anything to keep Jacob close, because he didn't just want Jacob in the family. He wanted Jacob trapped in the system. So keep that in mind as we read what happens next, because the next move we're about to see, especially what Rachel does, it makes a lot more sense when you realize everyone in this family has learned to grab blessing in the wrong way. Back to chapter 31. When Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole her father's household gods. Now, whether Rachel took those household gods because she believed they had spiritual power, or whether she took them because she knew they had power over her father, either way, she grabbed them kind of like an insurance policy. Something to fall back on in case Jacob's God wasn't enough to protect them. And there's this fascinating little wordplay in the Hebrew here. The text links Jacob and Rachel with a parallel phrase. Jacob stole away and Rachel stole the gods. He slipped out from under Laban's control. She slipped the idols out from under Laban's roof. It's the same idea, same language, two kinds of stealing. One is an escape and the other is a backup plan. Verse 20, moreover, Jacob deceived, surprise, surprise, Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him he was running away. So it seems like Jacob is kind of back to his old tricks, slipping into deception again. And honestly, he is. Remember how we've compared Jacob to a wild horse being broken? God has started the work in him. Jacob is beginning to trust the Lord, but he's not yet fully broken. And when the pressure hits, what does he default to? Deception. But don't miss this, because it'd be easy to paint Jacob as nothing but a liar here. But the truth is, even while Jacob is stumbling, his heart is still moving towards obedience. God had already spoken clearly to him in verse 3. Then the Lord said to Jacob, go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you. So Jacob, he isn't running from God. He's actually trying to follow God. He's trying to obey the calling, but he's just slipping back into old patterns because that's what he's always done to survive. He's not quite broken yet, and that brings us to the real question. Does Jacob actually have anything to fear? Does he really need to sneak away in deception? Does Rachel really need an insurance policy tucked under her saddle? Or is this the moment where God is going to teach them both the same lesson? That when God says, I will be with you, you don't need backup plans. You don't need deception. Verse 21, so he fled with all he had, crossed the Euphrates River, and headed for the hill country of Gilead. Jacob finally leaves Haran in Padan Aram and begins the long journey home, about 500 miles back to the land of Canaan. So after 20 years away, he's almost there. He's almost home. And as you can see from this map, he's headed back towards the land of promise, first given to Abraham, then to Isaac, and now to him. And as we walk through the rest of this story, I want you to keep one question in the back of your mind. what if Jacob had made it? Like he hoped, like he was praying it. God, please help us escape. God, please make it so Laban can't follow us. Please let this be clean, quick, quiet, and over. And that raises the question, what if he had gotten away clean and clear and never seen Laban again? If that happened, nothing would have been resolved. No closure, no confrontation, no justice, no growth, just distance. Because God wasn't just trying to get Jacob out of Haran. God was trying to get Haran out of Jacob. And God wanted Jacob to face the mirror of himself for one last time through the face of Uncle Laban. Remember what we've learned. God is more concerned with breaking us than with making us comfortable. And Uncle Laban was still one of the key tools God was using to break Jacob's will, because God will often use relational tension, broken relationships, unresolved conflict, people who press on your weak spots as a part of the refining process. It's like a cowboy saddle breaking a wild horse. The pressure isn't pointless. The resistance is the point. And God, in his mercy, won't let Jacob run from the very thing he wants to use to transform him. Verse 22, on the third day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. Taking his relatives with him, he pursued Jacob for 7 days and caught up with him in the hill country of Gilead. You can almost hear Uncle Laban raging as he rides out after them, shouting, that stinking heel grabber, that Jacob again, always slipping away, always outsmarting, always taking what Laban believes belongs to him. And I don't think Laban was coming out for a peaceful family reunion. I think he fully intended to harm Jacob, maybe even kill him, take back his daughters, reclaim his grandchildren, and seize all the property he believed Jacob had tricked him into losing, which is exactly why God steps in. Because when Laban is at full speed, with revenge in his heart, the Lord shows up and speaks directly to him. Verse 24, then God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream at night and said to him, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. Notice what God doesn't say. He doesn't thunder from heaven, hey, Laban, turn around right now or face my wrath. He doesn't stop the pursuit with fire. He doesn't wipe out Laban on the road. Instead, God actually allows Uncle Laban to catch up. But he draws a hard line. God makes it unmistakably clear that Laban is not to speak to Jacob with any agenda. No threats, no manipulation, no pressure to bring him back, no public scolding for leaving. Jacob is under the Lord's protection, and Laban has been put on notice. So, why would God allow the confrontation at all? It's because God isn't just rescuing Jacob from Laban. He's breaking Jacob through Laban. Jacob needs to face the mirror one last time. He needs to stand toe-to-toe with the very kind of man he used to be, controlling, deceptive, self-serving, and learn that he doesn't have to survive by trickery anymore. God is teaching him something deeper than escape. It's that, Jacob, you don't need deception when you're under my protection. Verse 25, Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country of Gilead when Laban overtook him, and Laban and his relatives camped there too. Hey, sounds like a family reunion. Everybody's camping together. Then Laban said to Jacob, what have you done? You've deceived me, and you've carried off my daughters like captives in a war. Why did you run off secretly and deceive me? Why didn't you tell me, so I could send you away with joy and singing to the music of timbrels and harps? Don't mistake this. This is an extremely tense moment. As soon as Laban catches up, he immediately flips the script. He plays the victim. He launches into this hypocritical speech acting wounded and offended, accusing Jacob of secretly snatching away his daughters, like some kind of criminal. And then he lays it on thick. If you would have just told me, I would have sent you off with a party, with singing and laughter and joy. And it's like, really, Laban? After 20 years of manipulation, exploitation, and control, now you're this gentle, loving father? And isn't it amazing how abusers, they can do that? How easily they can play the victim card the moment they lose control. But Jacob, Leah, and Rachel, they all know Laban's true colors. They knew he was lying. They knew this whole emotional speech was a ruse. Because Laban didn't come all this way for a farewell party. He came for something else. Verse 28. You didn't even let me kiss my grandchildren and my daughters goodbye. You've done a foolish thing. But regardless of old Uncle Laban's corrupt character, regardless of his false gods that he trusted in, regardless of the way he had mistreated and abused Jacob, we still have to ask the hard question. Is there any truth to what he's saying? And the answer is yes. I mean, absolutely. So now Laban is using that little kernel of truth to manipulate. He's playing the victim. He's twisting the moment to regain control. But the reality is, they were his daughters and they were his grandchildren. And here's something we all need to remember, especially when it comes to family conflict. There's almost always a small kernel of truth inside every manipulation. Not because the manipulator is right, but because they're usually twisting something real into a lie, which leads to some relational wisdom I want you to take home today. Own your piece of the pie. Think of conflict like a pie chart. When you ask, well, whose fault is this? Or who's responsible for this disagreement? That blame, it gets divided up like slices. It's 50-50, or is it 30-70 or 10-90? Now take Jacob and Laban. Was Jacob wronged? I mean, yes, of course. Laban was a jerk. He manipulated him, lied to him, squeezed 20 years of labor out of him. And even tricked him into marrying a woman that Jacob didn't love. I mean, that's evil. That's heavy. But was Laban wronged too? Yeah. Because Jacob did sneak away. And Jacob did deceive. Even if he felt justified, the truth is he ran and he lied. So what is it? Like 95% Laban's fault and 5% Jacob? 99 and 1% Jacob? I mean, honestly, it's probably closer to the 99% Laban and 1% Jacob. But here's the point. Even if it's 99% their fault and 1% yours, own your 1%. Even if they never apologize. Even if they act like they did nothing wrong. Even if they rub it in your face. Own your part anyway. Bring it to the Lord. Bring it into the light. Ask forgiveness for your slice. Not because they deserve it, but because you refuse to let bitterness keep you chained. Because vengeance belongs to God, not to you. And here's the freedom statement of this whole section. You don't have to win the argument to be free. Verse 29. I have the power to harm you. But last night, the God of your father said to me, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. Now you have gone off because you long to return to your father's household. But why did you steal my gods? We know Jacob didn't just long for his father's household. He was obeying God by returning home. God told him to go. And Jacob is trying to walk in that calling. But the way he did it, sneaking away in deception, opened the door for something even worse, a legitimate offense against Laban through Rachel, stealing the household gods. And can I just point out what a tragic, wasted opportunity this moment is? The one true God showed up in a vision and spoke directly to Uncle Laban. Yahweh himself intervened. You would think that that would be a turning point. The moment Laban finally humbles himself, repents, and begins to follow the Lord. But instead, the whole opportunity gets swallowed up in chaos. Jacob stole away, Rachel stole the gods. And now Laban isn't talking about the voice of God. He's hunting for stolen idols. And here's what's so heartbreaking. The living God just revealed himself to Laban. But all Laban cares about is his little trinket false gods. Because when people lack integrity, it gives wicked men and women something to fixate on. It gives them leverage. It gives them a distraction. And instead of the conversation being, Laban, you just encountered Yahweh, the conversation becomes, where are my gods? It's a sobering reminder, even when God shows up, a hardened heart can still choose darkness, especially when sin provides a convenient excuse. Verse 31, Jacob answered Laban, I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force. So finally, the deceiver becomes honest and open. And can I just suggest, this is a huge first step when we've wronged our family members. You come in humility. You own your 1%. And you simply tell the truth. I was afraid. And that's why I hurt you. I'm sorry for those cruel words. I shouldn't have picked that fight. I shouldn't have turned Christmas dinner into a political argument. I talked about you behind your back and I was wrong. That kind of conversation, that kind of confession, it's powerful because it doesn't defend, it doesn't excuse, it doesn't shift blame. It just owns your 1%. It just owns your piece of the pie. And that's why humble confession is so often the first real step towards peace in a broken family relationship. Not because it instantly fixes everything, but because it breaks the pride that keeps everything stuck. Verse 32, but if you find anyone who has your gods, that person shall not live. In the presence of our relatives, see for yourself whether there is anything of yours here with me. And if so, take it. Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen the gods. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and into Leah's tent and into the tent of the two female servants. But he found nothing. After he came out of Leah's tent, he entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them inside her camel's saddle and was sitting on them. Laban searched through everything in the tent, but found nothing. Rachel said to her father, don't be angry, my lord, that I cannot stand in your presence. I'm having my period. So he searched, but could not find the household gods. In a not so subtle way, the story gives us real insight into how Rachel viewed her father's household gods. Where were they? Well, she hid them inside her camel's saddle, and then she went into her tent, and she sat down on them. And the text tells us she was on her period. Now that detail, it's not random. It's intentional. Because in the ancient world, that would be considered ceremonially unclean, meaning Rachel was deliberately defiling these idols. She's not treating them like sacred objects. She's treating them like trash, like something unworthy of respect. And that tells us something important. Those gods may have meant everything to Laban, but they meant nothing to Rachel, except as a way to strike back. This wasn't worship. This was revenge. Because Rachel didn't just grow up under an idol-worshiping father. She grew up under a lying, cheating, abusive father. A man who not only betrayed Jacob, but betrayed her. After all, Jacob, he worked 7 years for her heart, only to have Laban manipulate and use her and her sister like pawns in his game. So Rachel's act hits cold. It's calculated and deeply personal. It's like she's saying, you used me, you used him, you used everyone, and now I'm taking the one thing you can't live without, and I'm sitting on it. Verse 36, Jacob was angry and took Laban to task. What is my crime? He asked Laban. How have I wronged you that you hunt me down? Now Jacob, he's furious here. And in his mind, it makes sense. I mean, he's trying to obey God. Yes, he messed up by sneaking away. And he believes he's doing the right thing by taking his family home. And now Laban shows up accusing him of some ridiculous made-up scenario about stolen household gods. So in Jacob's eyes, Laban has crossed the line. But here's the problem. Jacob argues like he knows 100% of what happened, but he actually doesn't. And isn't that how we do it in families? We come in hot. We assume the worst. We speak with certainty. And we don't have all the facts, but in the process, we end up looking like a foolish jerk. So what if Jacob had taken a different posture? What if instead of coming in angry, he came in humble? Laban, I don't know who took them, but I'll help you look. I'm not here to fight. I'm just trying to obey God. I'm sorry I didn't tell you that I was afraid, but he doesn't do that. He gets defensive. And then he does what we all do when we've been carrying pain for many years. He uncorks it and lets it go. 20 years of frustration, 20 years of being used, 20 years of being lied to, 20 years of injustice, and it all comes rushing out at once, straight at Uncle Laban. Verse 37, now that you have searched through all my goods, what have you found that belongs to your household? Put it here in front of your relatives and mine, and let them judge between the two of us. I have been with you for 20 years now. Your sheep and your goats I have not miscarried, nor have I eaten rams from your flocks. I did not bring you animals torn by wild beasts. I bore the loss myself, and you demanded payment for me for whatever was stolen by day or night. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in the daytime, and the cold at night, and sleep fled from my eyes. It was like this for 20 years in your household. I worked for you 14 for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flocks. And you changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been with me, you would have surely sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands, and last night he rebuked you. Is Jacob right? Yeah, absolutely. Every word he says here is true, but he's still wrong in how he handles it, because this isn't his justice to execute. It's God's. What spills out of Jacob is, in that moment, it isn't just honesty. It's 20 years of resentment finally coming to the surface. 20 years of being wronged, cheated, 20 years of being used and manipulated. And when the cork finally pops, he doesn't just speak the truth. He unloads it with the force of revenge. And he does it publicly in front of his relatives, in front of witnesses. He just lets it fly. It's like that family blow up at Thanksgiving, or the side conversation where you start venting to cousins, or the prayer request that's actually just gossip, or the angry post you really want to put on Facebook or Instagram because you're tired of swallowing it. Jacob was wronged, no question. But he didn't have to take the revenge into his own hands, because God has already promised him something greater than perfect arguments. God was his shield. God was with him. God would protect him. God would handle Uncle Laban. And this is the part that's so hard for us to believe. God will bring justice, even if we never see it in this life. That doesn't mean that what happened didn't matter. It doesn't mean that the pain wasn't real. It means you don't have to carry the weight of being both the wounded party and the judge. You can be free, because God is perfectly just. Just look at what the Apostle Paul wrote in Romans chapter 12. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, It is mine to avenge. I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Where confession and openness is the first step towards peace, defensiveness is the first step towards a relational war. Confession says, I was wrong. I own my part. I want healing. Defensiveness says, I'm not the problem. You're the problem. Let's fight. Confession, it lowers the temperature. Defensiveness lights the match. And in broken families, the moment we stop confessing and we start defending, we usually stop moving towards peace and start moving towards a battle. Verse 43, Laban answered Jacob, the women are my daughters, the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks. All you see is mine. Yet what can I do today about these daughters of mine, or about the children they have borne? Come now, let's make a covenant, you and I, and it will serve as a witness between us. Laban can't change the embarrassing facts. And by the way, everyone there knew the truth. So he does what people like him always do. He changes the subject. He knows that he's wrong. He knows the accusations didn't hold up. But instead of repenting, he hides behind a new angle, his generosity. In other words, he tries to shield his guilt with this tone of, look at how good I've been to you, Jacob. As if being occasionally kind cancels out 20 years of manipulation. Because a self-seeking hypocrite like Laban can rarely bring himself to do the one thing that would actually heal the situation. Repent. Own it. Acknowledge it. And acknowledge it publicly. And here's the painful but important reminder. Don't expect a non-believer to act like a believer. Don't expect someone who doesn't fear God to suddenly start operating with humility, truth, and conviction. So what should you do? Instead of obsessing over whether they'll ever apologize, focus on you being filled with the Holy Spirit. Focus on your integrity, your peace, your obedience, your self-control. Sadly, that's not what Jacob does here. And because of that, this relationship, it can't move forward in trust. So the only way forward is boundaries. Not revenge, not endless arguments, not trying to force closure, just clear lines. So future conflict doesn't keep destroying the future God is trying to build. Verse 45, so Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. He said to his relatives, gather some stones. So they took stones and piled them in a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Laban called it Hagar Sahadutha, and Jacob called it Gilead. Laban gives it a name in Aramaic, and Jacob gives it a name in Hebrew. Same moment, two languages, almost like they're standing in the same place, but living in two very different worlds. Yes, it's a pillar, but it's more than that. It's not just a memorial. It's a boundary marker. It's a wall. A wall that says this far and no further. A wall that says we can have peace, but we will not have closeness. A wall that says you don't get access to me anymore. Verse 48. Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me today. That is why it is called Gilead. It was also called Mizpah, because he said, may the Lord keep watch between you and me, and when we are away from each other. If you mistreat my daughters, or if you take any wives besides my daughters, even though no one is with us, remember that God is a witness between you and me. Laban also said to Jacob, here is this heap, and here is this pillar I have set between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness that I will not go past this heap to your side to harm you, and that you will not go past this heap and pillar to my side to harm me. May the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor and the God of their father judge between us. Wow. Do these two men sound like they trust each other? Not even a little. This pillar isn't some beautiful symbol of reconciliation. It's basically a monument that says, let's never see each other again. It's a peace treaty, not a friendship. It's closure, not closeness. It's the line in the sand that says we're done. And this is the boundary that keeps it that way. We'll finish with the last few verses here. So Jacob took an oath in the name of the fear of his father Isaac. He offered a sacrifice there in the hill country and invited his relatives to a meal. After they had eaten, they spent the night there. Early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then he left and returned home. It's really a tragic story. It's tragic because Uncle Laban, he was a mirror image of Jacob. Same manipulation, same scheming, same self-interest, just packaged in an older man with more power. And the saddest part is that Jacob was still so full of himself, so defensive, so reactive, that his deception and his selfishness ended up costing him any chance of a real relationship with his uncle. Instead of reconciliation, they ended up with a wall. Instead of healing, they end up with distance, not because God couldn't redeem it, but because pride wouldn't let in. So let's put Jacob's family tree just back up on screen for a moment. Does it look a little bit familiar? Lightning bolts of division, favoritism, lies, manipulation, brokenness that seems to get passed down like an inheritance. And if it does, I want you to remember Paul's words in Romans chapter 12. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink.